Good evening, everyone. Excuse me, everyone. Good evening.
Signs up.
Welcome to the Wenham Community Preservation Committee meeting of Tuesday, January 29th, 2019. I want to note that the selectmen are also here in a posted meeting, and our chairman of our Zoning Board of Appeals, Tony Fieri, is likewise here, present. So, do you need to open a meeting?
I do. This is a posted Board of Selectmen meeting. We do have a quorum here, so I just would call the meeting, our Selectmen meeting, to order.
All right, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to listen to some presentations, starting with that from Harbor Light. And after the presentation, we will go around this room with our committee first, each person in order, asking questions as required. Then I'll turn it over to the Board of Selectmen and would like you to do the same, go around and ask whatever questions, comments is appropriate. So with that being said, Mr. Franza, would you like to present your plan to us all, your application?
Shocking. Is that okay? It's nice to see everybody again. It's been a little while since I've been in Wenham, though I did spend a lot of quality time in this room once upon a time. I believe the screen is new, but other than that, it looks as I remember. So, I'm Andrew DeFranza. I think some of you probably know me, and some of you probably don't. With the nonprofit affordable housing group out of Beverly called Harbor Light Community Partners. If you're interested in knowing more about us, I'm happy to talk about that. But I know this has been going on for quite a long time, and some of you are familiar with the project, so I'll try to be brief and respect the rest of your agenda. So what you have in front of you, this binder here today, is a revised proposal that we had submitted a number of years ago now, I think almost 5, actually. Originally, the proposal was for 60 units of affordable senior housing, 100% senior. What you have in front of you today is in part a result of an agreement between Harbor Light and a number of neighbors that makes the project somewhat smaller and shorter. So I'll describe to you the features of the project and the adjustments that are in that process. If you have questions about the mechanics or how it's going to work, I'm happy to answer those. So what we have now is a project that's 45 units instead of 60, so 15 units smaller and 1 story smaller. So this is 2 stories instead of the original 3, and it's moved another 50 feet back. The drawings you have are the original 3-story drawings because that's not been adjusted yet. We do expect at some time to be in front of the ZBA and to adjust the drawings down to the 2 stories that we agreed to do with the neighbors that we were in discussions with, as well as some of the design features. But the pivotal points were that it was 45 units instead of 60, and that it was 50 feet back from the line. To achieve that, we had to ask the current owner, Mr. Burnett, to give us some extra land, roughly 4/10 of an acre, which he's agreed to do, and we'll have to document that with an amendment to our existing site control agreement, at which point then the building will move back to accommodate the 50-foot commitment that we made to one of the near neighbors. The rest of the project more or less remains the same, other than the fact that the economics of the deal changes with its size and its timing and some of the operating parameters. But to refresh people, this is a 100% affordable deal. These units are all for people that are 62 and over. That was another part of the commitment that we made. This would be 100% affordable to people below 60% of median income. All of the apartments are 1 bedroom, roughly 650 square feet. Staffing on site, all maintenance and operations borne by the project. So some people originally years and years ago asked about plowing and trash and those sorts of things. That's all borne by the project and operated by Harbor Light, as we do with our other projects, some of which you may be familiar with, Firehouse Place in Hamilton, or Turtle Creek or Turtle Woods in Beverly, for example. There is a local preference feature that is governed by the state, but that's also part of the commitment. in the permit and in the application to you all and in the agreement with the neighbors. So what you end up with is a 45-unit, all-senior, all-affordable project that puts Wenham over their 10% threshold for their subsidized housing inventory requirement with the state, which essentially will make you exempt from 40B for hopefully many years to come, though not as many as we originally had hoped. And that's probably in a nutshell what the project is. There's a lot of technical elements to it. I assume there'll be lots of questions, but in a very short summary, those are the changes that were made: height, distance, number of units. The rest of the project essentially remains the same. But I'm happy, Madam Chairman, to take any questions that people have.
Tom, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, Andrew.
Hello, nice to see you.
I'm glad you addressed right off the bat what I was interested in hearing.
I was anticipating.
Elaboration on reduction in height from 3 stories to 2.
Yeah.
Do you know what that, will it be a mathematically equivalent reduction in building height, or how does that affect?
Yeah, you may have the original drawing there in front of you. This was originally 35 feet,
right.
which is the height limit for a single-family house in Wenham, and it was buried the 3rd story in a mansard. So it'll be a commensurate ratio reduction. I expect that we will not have a mansard. The reason for the mansard roof was to try to accommodate the 3rd story, but I expect we won't have a mansard. We'll certainly be very interested in this case in some solar capacity, and so we would not go with a mansard, as well as the mansard roof is much more expensive to construct, and now we're looking for ways to save money.
So now, you raise another question for me. So do you think it would be a gable roof?
There'll probably be gable ends that'll hide sort of a flat roof in the middle that we can apply some solar on, but it'll look like a gable from the end. That's the idea that we have at the moment. Whatever that is would have to get submitted to the ZBA as a part of the amendment for the height and the volume. But it won't be a gable, I can tell you that.
So I noticed that the in the settlement
Mm-hmm.
agreement, the language actually says that it'll be reduced to 2 stories unless enlarging the building footprint to accommodate 45 units is not feasible due to physical site constraints or would result in significant additional costs.
Right.
You didn't present it that way.
No.
So can you just comment on?
Yeah, we feel the original intent in the negotiation was that we knew they wanted us to get to 2 stories, and we expressed in good faith, as we would have in any other case, that we were going to try to do that if it was possible, and it looks like it is possible, largely because Mr. Burnett is going to let us take some more land. If he didn't let us take some more land, we would have major problems. You can't move it 50 feet and move it down, even with the height limits, and the topography in the right corner gets awkward very quickly. So we're essentially going to shift on the left side of the building, shift the building back, and the topography can handle that without it being significantly more costly, so we feel pretty confident about it. So we didn't expect, that was part of the negotiation, was it had to be possible.
Yeah.
So far it looks like it is possible, and therefore we'll honor what we said we would do.
Okay. Can I ask another question?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So in the water usage and mitigation
Yeah.
townwide,
Mhm.
how does that actually, wind up taking place, and how can you guarantee that would be an 100% offset?
So if I recall, and this is a while now, the way that it was supposed to work is we were supposed to essentially both mitigate the water usage on site, meaning have as much as possible low water use, low flow toilets, low flow showers, as well as native species and non-irrigation going forward. That was part of the Ipswich River Watershed Association's requests, and we had agreed to that. So you make the water use as low as possible, and then practically what was supposed to happen is we were supposed to fund water mitigation capacity in other places in town. So let's say I'm making this up, but let's say we were using 100 gallons of water a day, even at the suppressed level. There would be funding that you could change your toilet and shower heads, and someone else could change theirs. Now the idea was to try to apply this as much as possible to municipal buildings, so that in the schools and it seems like a good idea, but it could also be private households, so that the reduction in use in other places was a match to the increase in use at Maple Woods.
And so somehow that gets managed by the town?
We're open.
Tom, interject
Please.
briefly.
Sure.
This is something that at town meeting last year, the town voted on establishing a water mitigation fund. And so the town's currently working on putting together a
great.
policy, given the number of large construction projects, residential, ongoing, and coming soon. So we do have a policy that will hopefully be going to the Board of Selectmen shortly, that we've been working on and drafting with.
Thank you, Jackie.
So that's coming though, so we do have that mechanism.
And that didn't exist before. There was also a possibility Ipswich Water, if in the original permit, wanted us to, Ipswich River Watershed, I should say, wanted to talk about ways to capture water on site and some underground tanks. I have no idea whether that's going to be something that happens. That was always a marginal idea, but it's something that they were hoping we would try to do with philanthropy. So I think we'll see what happens with that feature. But the other feature, I think, would apply.
Thank you, Tom. Natalie?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andrew.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So you probably know I'm fairly new to the committee, and so I really tried to learn as much as possible, and I did that by speaking with people and just looking online to learn and get up to speed with this. I mean, I have to be honest, when I first heard of this project, I immediately didn't like it because I was at the Housing Consortium symposium that had happened at the church, and I heard the follow-up about how the community really wanted to have more of a integrated approach to addressing the 10%. So then I started to just research your project, and you know, the first thing that I noticed was you just have such an earnest approach to this. I mean,
Thank you.
You've worked hard here, and it's obvious. So, and congratulations just on that, right? Because it's a merit in your favor. You know, the other thing is the Harbor Light's reputation is amazing. I mean, my background has introduced me to many developers that can't hold a candle to your reputation. It's impressive.
That's very kind of you.
And so I see this, and I also see the dilemma that we have. I spoke with Wayne at the Ipswich Watershed Association just because his letter of support was very short, and I just wanted him to elaborate on that. And, you know, essentially he was saying, look, as an organization, we don't typically support development, but if we were going to, it would be something like this. He said to me that they have addressed every single issue of concern that Wayne had, and it was fine. You know, the one question, so I mean, I can take you through my little experience. I mean, I drove to Maple Street, I got out, I saw some neighbors. I mean, so I am familiar with the content of the project. This is the only question that really stands out to me, because I also understand that a lot of the changes from the first iteration of the 60 units to the 45 has been codified or memorialized in the zoning permits.
They will be, but they're not yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's because that was a question. How will you make good on the promise if that happens? This is a regional housing service. The DHCD issued this memorandum May 22nd, 2018, and I'm bringing this up because you know, a lot of the project is a positive for us because it's addressing the 10%. It's 100% focused on the elder population, and this document. I mean, you've seen this?
I have not.
Just to summarize, it's a memo that the.
Oh, this is not DHCD.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
just to, if that matters to anybody.
Okay.
So.
Natalie, where are you going with this? Could I ask you?
Yeah, for sure. It's a memo that essentially says that the
55 plus.
What is the organization there?
Yeah, so this is a regional planning office in the Acton area. So it would essentially be as if, let's say, Hamilton, Wenham, Beverly, Ipswich, Topsfield created a regional entity. That's sort of what this is. But they're reflecting on a DHCD policy about 55 plus. Is that what you're?
Yes.
Yeah.
And are you familiar with that
I am.
policy? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, let's.
Sure.
Where I'm getting at is, you know, there has been, in this memorandum, it talks about 100% senior housing projects not actually counting towards the 40B requirements for cities, and what this memorandum is saying. I can share it if you like and even email
Okay,
it.
but the focus of what we want to discuss right now is Mr. DeFrance's application.
And
so,
that this is important because if the project is
no,
predicated
but that
on
would be part of our discussion
well, he's here now.
afterwards.
Can't we ask him?
No. No.
I'd like to ask him this question, if that's okay with you. Because for me, it's important to understand how should this issue be adopted by the DHCD by the time this happens, and we go through all of this and spend all of our money in our coffers, if the DHCD doesn't count this towards our SHI, that's an issue. Would you agree?
I would.
So could you just talk about that a little bit?
Go ahead, briefly, please.
Yeah. So DHCD has, they have a policy out about 55-plus housing. There's 3 levels of age-restricted housing that are possible. One is 55-plus, one is 62-plus, one is 65-plus. The reason that matters particularly is if you have a 55-plus restriction, generally there's also a floor on the age, which means you could have somebody in the apartment who was at least 18 or older, but they could be down to 18, whereas if you have 62 or 65, everybody in the unit has to be over 62 or 65. And so one of the issues here is that we're essentially committing to a 62-plus age restriction, not a 55-plus age restriction. And DHCD's policy, as I understand it, is related to the 55-plus. So if you had a 55-plus project, this happened in Hamilton recently at Canterbrook, some people may be familiar with that, where they were going to go 55 plus. The DHCD policy came up because they wanted to be 55 plus and not have, DHCD was essentially going to enforce that they could not exclude children. That's really what this is all about, which is a good rule, in my opinion. And so what they ended up doing is the Canterbrook developers bought out their affordability requirement and gave money to the housing trust and did not include any units on the site, which is sort of not exactly how you would have wanted that to go, but that's how they evaded it. So my understanding of it is that it would apply if it was 55 plus, but not if it's 62 plus.
Thank you very much.
But I'm not DHCD, so.
Patrick, would you have some questions?
Yes, I'm very familiar with the project, very familiar with Andrew. Just 2 questions. One was the stormwater runoff. It sounds like the Wayne Casting Way, Ipswich River has kind of addressed it with you, and you're willing to work with him.
Right.
Maybe recharge the swamp.
Right.
That would be great. The other thing that we had discussed before with Wayne as well was unused meds finding its way into the septic system and leaching into the watershed. We talked about unused med collection in the lobbies to do it. Is that something that you're willing to codify?
Sure. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I'm going to leave cards as well, Madam Chairman, in case there are questions that come later. So if you want to talk about that.
I have no questions. I mean, obviously you've been drilled pretty good ahead of me, so.
It's been a few years.
Oh, yeah, you're pretty, you gotta give you credit. You're at it. Keep at it.
It's not his first rodeo.
No, I was taller when we started.
Had a few more here, huh?
Okay. Don?
I have no questions.
Leo?
I read the Wenham Affordable Housing Action Plan and had several goals, and one of the goals, goal number 2, was to get our town above the 10% level. We've been trying to do this for several years now. We've spent money on affordables. We've got very few for quite a bit of money, and we're nowhere near the 10%. The only reason we're at 8% is due to Enon Village, which is a similar project on Larch Row, which in fact I live near, and it happens to be a credit to the neighborhood. I'm excited about this because this, if it materializes, 45 units will bring our affordable housing to over 10%, maybe 12 or 13%, and this will protect our children from 40B also. So I'm excited about it, especially where the money they're asking for is less than $17,000 a unit to bring us to 13%. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming this evening, sharing all of this. One of the concerns that many of us have is, can we get all of your ducks in a row by town meeting time, or at least to have outlined everything that needs to be done. We have a legal memo tonight, which is consistent with what I expected. I would expect the motion to be written in such a way that this committee would recommend X number of dollars, subject to the following contingencies, et cetera, by a date certain, perhaps by the end of 2019. Do you think that you'll be able to work with the ZBA and any other boards that might require permits?
I think that's very likely. The ZBA can be very involved, as you know, but I'm sure that's a viable timeline and seems very reasonable. And we would expect the conditions as well.
Fine.
Yes. Andrew, again, thank you. You and I and Jeff Wilhelm, we walked the property.
Yeah, nice to see you, Mr. Burt.
See you again.
Thank you.
Since the plans have changed a little bit, going from 60 to 45, originally I thought with the 60 unit was significant because then you could provide certain medical services for the people that are going to be living here. But bring it down to 45, does that change the type of service you can provide for these potential inhabitants?
Yeah, no, that's a good. You're on the Housing Authority Board, right? If I recall. Yeah. So makes sense that would be your question. Yeah, it's one of the things that was a little bit of a nuance that always bothered me because it wasn't one of the main contentions in the permitting, but operationally, I was always very concerned because I knew if we went below 60, we were going to have to reduce staffing accordingly, and so I do think that the staffing model will still be very good, but it won't be as good as it would have been if there were more.
And you'll still be able to provide the services you wanted to.
Yeah, but it won't be quite as good.
In the old plans, the kitchen was closest to the property line of the inhabitants in the area, and I suggested moving the kitchen because the noise from the fan would be a distraction for the people in the community. Have they moved the location of the kitchen?
I do not know that, but I could check for you.
I would like that.
Sure.
Yeah, because only fairness to these people that are making these adjustments.
Yep.
Thank you.
Barbara?
Well, I have to reiterate a few other people's comments. And great job you did getting this all organized.
Thank you.
I initially was not too excited about 60 units down there on Maple Street, like Natalie was saying, but I think that your compromise of 45 and working with the abutters who were so upset and all of the remedies that you came up with is a really good show of good faith. So
thank you.
I think that, this is a project, pushing it back, lowering it to 2 levels, cutting down the number of units, really makes it look a lot more palatable. So
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Catherine, I'd like to turn this over to the Board of Selectmen.
Sure, let me start with John.
I'm just going to simply say that I have been watching Mr. DeFranza and their operation for many, many years, and I feel very privileged that he has stayed the course in the town of Wenham because, as Leo indicated and others, this is a very important project for our affordability requirements of the state. But every bit as important, if not more so, is having grown up in the construction industry. I've seen developers that aren't worth 50 cents, and sometimes a lot worse than that over the years. My father could retire on the money that he never collected. The towns get beat out of things. I've never seen where this could even come close with him. So, I'm much in support of this.
Thank you.
For a whole host of reasons.
Jack?
So I want to echo Barbara's comments that I was not in favor of 60 units, as Imra well knows. And the 3 stories, particularly that close to the street in the residential area, I'm very pleased that you were able to compromise with the neighbors, like Barbara just reiterated, that 45 units, 2 stories, 50 feet back, all of that is really good. And that, so my concerns are really, I've read a lot of memos today, and that, so it's timing, and that, my first question is, has your board approved your proposal?
They have last week.
And is there any documentation coming to the board, or do we have any documentation they have done that?
I don't think you do. We could get a resolution for you or minutes.
It was referred to in your application, or in your, perhaps in your covering email to me.
I'm just trying to dot the i's and cross the t's.
No, I understand that. You'll get us that.
Sure.
So time is short, and when do you anticipate having a definitive agreement, using my words, with the parties to the lawsuit?
So Yep. My understanding is that the draft, I see the plaintiff's attorney is here if you wanted to comment, but the draft of the final settlement agreement has been going back and forth. I think we've made our final comments on it, so we're expecting that it's going to be done by the end of the week or early next week. But I don't know that definitively. You may know better.
Does he want to comment?
I don't know. I'm looking at him.
You want to go over and tap him on the shoulder?
No.
And see what happens?
Sorry, Peter. No, it's just Peter. I'm messing with him. So I don't know what the timing is.
Well, town meeting is coming up.
Yeah.
So this is not, this was, last October is one thing. This is almost February 1st.
Yeah.
And we have more or less a drop dead date of, call it early March, an absolute date of March 5th.
Right.
And how long it has to get done and produced to now and say late February, March 1st. And one of the most important documents, what I just referred to, is a definitive agreement.
Right. And they communicated to me that they thought it could be done as early as the end of this week.
Okay.
So, but I'm not the attorney, so as soon as we have it, I would get it for you.
Yeah, and for both the selectmen and
Sure.
this committee. I'm going to be, do you anticipate, and you don't have to ask the other attorney.
No, he's not here. Yeah.
Contingencies.
It's just Peter. I was just messing with Peter. Sorry. Go ahead.
He was
I was just joking.
joking.
Yeah.
He was looking at Peter when he was making that comment.
Sorry, Peter. Go ahead.
Ignore that.
Yes. I was just messing with Peter. Yes. Go ahead.
I almost lost my train of thought there. So,
Resolution?
anticipate, other than ZBA approval, which is obviously very important and
Yeah.
expected to be favorably acted on,
Yep.
presumably, do you anticipate any other contingencies in this definitive agreement?
The contingencies, you mean votes that have to yet take place?
Contingencies that you wouldn't go forward unless you had X, Y, and Z. Now, you've already made, in the draft agreement, there's a contingency, you're looking for at least $1 million, I've got that.
Right.
By the way, somebody mentioned 17,000 per unit, I think it's 30,000 per unit, if I did the math right.
I think when you combine the housing trust and the CPA requests
When you
both.
divide $1,350,000 by 45, it comes out to 30,000 a unit.
Right, but this request is for $750 to the CPA, which is probably where that number came from.
But you asked, but your draft agreement says you anticipate at least $1 million, I believe.
Correct, that's correct,
Yeah.
yep.
And so, other than your request for at least $1 million,
Yes.
$750 from this committee here, board here, and ZBA approval, do you anticipate any other contingencies in this agreement?
Yes.
What would they be?
The housing trust vote and then the Board of Selectmen vote
Okay.
affirming the housing trust vote.
Okay. Any other contingencies?
I believe that is all.
Any contingencies about building the building itself?
No, not that I'm aware of.
So when we get the draft agreement, other than those contingencies, which I understand,
Mhm.
you don't anticipate any outs in there, any other contingencies that, okay.
No. The broad contingency was that we agreed to make these changes and the plaintiffs agreed to support the project, so there'll be language to that effect in there. Mhm. But no other technical contingency, which is what I think you're asking.
Yeah. So my next question, you're not a lawyer, but this thing has to be ultimately approved by a judge. This is a court case.
It is, but yes.
So, I mean, we're not going to have the judge approve this next month. So presumably, one of the contingencies, which is reasonable, is the judge has to approve the settlement, right?
Yes. I think the assumption is that if the parties are agreed to it in mediation.
As well.
Right.
You could be surprised.
True.
And that, okay, so I think those are my questions. I want to make sure that when we have a document, we read it, other than the contingencies just mentioned, there are others in there.
Yep.
That ifs and buts and candy and nuts, so I'm concerned about that.
Yep.
You answered my question.
It should be very consistent with the shorter summary that you saw, just with more words, as attorneys are apt to do.
Waffling sentences in there, so I'm not anticipating to see those.
Those are my favorite, the waffling sentences.
That's all I have to ask right now.
Okay, so I have a couple of specific questions and then a more general concern. So you talked about, and I think the settlement, the term sheet talks about 62 and all. Does Harbor Light control the age limit, or is that under the control of a state agency?
So you really would control that through the permit. So the zoning board permit that determines what the age is what would control it. It has to be legal, meaning you have to use a an age restriction that would be affirmed by HUD or would be affirmed by fair housing rules. So you couldn't have like a 45 and over age restriction. So there are 3 legal ways to do that: 55, 62, 65. So once you agreed to 62 and it was in the zoning board permit, that's it.
So at 62, there would be no further state requirements?
Correct.
You feel confident that if the ZBA approves 62, you can build 62?
Yes.
Age.
62 age, not units. Yes. Yes.
That's
Correct.
close to 69.
Yeah.
The second question I've actually had for a long time, and I guess I still have, has to do with preference.
Mhm.
We talked about 70%. I think somewhere here you talk about 70% local
Yep.
preference. In my experience lately on the Affordable Housing Trust and with, as you know, a project that we're working on with Habitat on Hull Street,
Mhm.
they are also talking about preference. And there's my understanding of 70% local preference, in my simple mind, meant 70% of the units were going to be people who came or worked or whatever in
Mhm.
Wenham.
Right.
That's not exactly right.
No.
And may I ask you to, if you would, elaborate
Sure.
on the details of that, because it's a little
Yeah.
affordable housing-ish.
It is very affordable housing-ish. That's a good way to put it, and a little painfully technical. So stop me if it's a problem.
Understand what we're talking about when we say
Yeah. So
70%.
So the maximum you're allowed to do by statute, by state law, is 70%. The DHCD, and that's one of the waffles in the language, they have to affirm, or it's not, we don't just get to decide that. They have to, but you can, as a local community, say that you want 70%, we can submit that to them, and they have to affirm what the number is going to be. If they do affirm it, and you're in a community that is racially homogenous, as Wenham is, it's considered a fair housing or a civil rights violation to have a local preference in a community that's all white, because essentially you are practically excluding people of color, which is neither technically nor ethically nor legally acceptable. So what they do in that case is they'll take a wider regional approach to census data around racial percentages, and then if they're, let's say, Wenham is 98% Caucasian, which is probably pretty close, 96%, but regionally it's 79%, something like that. They would essentially include a percentage of folks, in this case of color, that would be included in your local preference number to make sure that the lottery itself was not discriminatory. So it's not a pure, it's not a pure 70% in that particular case. It also applies to the original application waiting list, but is not an ongoing feature. So when you end up, if we do this, there'll be hundreds of applications, right? That waiting list will have a certain order to it. The 70% will apply, or whatever DHCD approves, and then that waiting list will govern for years and years and years to come, right? People will move up the lists, people will come off the list, but 20 years from now, when the list is done, that doesn't apply again. They don't let you do that more than once.
So there are 2 lists at the beginning.
Right.
And after that,
Then it's
one list.
right. Many years later, you will be one list.
I don't think you'll be able, I don't expect you or imagine that you could answer this, but I would love for someone to be able, who has some knowledge, to be able to calculate in this instance.
Mm-hmm.
And I only ask it because it's presented as 70% Wenham.
Right.
And we're spending Wenham money. About how many of those units
Right.
are, given what we already
Right.
know,
Right.
would be expected to be. It's still
Yeah.
certainly, I guess it's over 10%, and helps people who
It's
need
great.
affordable housing.
Right. It's great.
But relative to,
Mm-hmm.
Wenham.
To that feature. So
If you have that number.
I can give you a pretty close comparison, and also when we use the language of 70%, we try to be careful to say within the realm of what is allowed and legal from DHCD. It's you can't. It's not just 70%. It's within the governance structure, but it's a mess to try to explain. Turtle Creek and Turtle Woods, for example, up the street is about 50% Beverly or next to town. So to give you a sense of sort of how that has worked out over a 30-year period with a very similar type of a building. That's as an organic matter. That's how it worked. So it's not an exact comparison, but it gives you a pretty close. I think if you were guessing, will we be 50% in the future? Something to that effect is probably pretty close. Mm-hmm. But that first, as a local operational matter, the real kicker, if you're an advocate, is you need people to get on the application in the lottery the first time, even if they're even if they're, they're not ready yet. This is now put my advocate hat on. I would tell everybody I knew, apply, apply, apply. Doesn't matter if you think you're going to use it or not. Just get on the list. You can always say no, and they'll drop you down. But that's a Jim Reynolds. Yeah, yeah.
So to get a more heterogeneous population, you expand the footprint of the town to the surrounding towns?
Patrick, wait a minute. It's a selectman's time.
I'll answer that one, though. Sure.
Actually, this is for you, Harriet. In that, do you and the committee know exactly which CPC monies you would be
Yes,
voting
we've
on?
all,
Can you elaborate on that? Which bucket are they coming out? Because I've seen 2 or 3 memos from Peter and other people. There's money here, money reserved, money over here. So where is, if you affirmatively approve this, where exactly, which buckets is the money coming out?
basically, it's the, do you want to answer that, Jackie? You have that right there in front of you. The,
So the CPC has money in 3 different funds that could be applied for an affordable housing project. The community housing bucket.
I've read all that, but
Yeah.
where exactly are they gonna be requesting the money to come out of?
So-
Has that been determined yet?
No, that will be determined on the 13th. They'll make their allocations first to those buckets with the new revenues, and then they'll vote their expenditures from those buckets.
depending on what other applications we've decided to fund.
Yes, that's right. I remember in the memo now that we have, yes, a couple of things, right.
So that'll be on the 13th, Jack, if you wanted to tune into that conversation, though.
Yes, I do.
But yes, to that point, I think you have done some work to understand if $750,000 were brought forward
Do we
to
have
town
it in the
meeting.
bank?
Do we have it, and
Yes.
where would it come from? I think that.
Jackie and I came up with a much higher figure that it could be made available without touching historic or open space and
Which we
recreation.
legally can't
Yes,
do.
that's right. We do have sufficient funds.
How much would come out of reserves, for example?
Most of it, I think, is the unbudgeted, how much is
My
there?
understanding is that for a request of this size, everything would be removed from budgetary reserve with the exception of $50,000 that might go to another area of support, but that was just playing with figures as applications came in. So it would be about 220,000 from that.
So that would be important to understand on the 13th. That's sort of my point.
It's
Because you're
difficult.
gonna, if you spend that money, you're not gonna have
Sure.
it for something else.
Well, it is difficult to
Like open space, for example.
Well, and it's difficult to forecast because it is really a decision of the committee to make that recommendation to town meeting. So I only played with the numbers in a happenstance if all of these things got funded type of scenario.
But we were pretty aware of the fact that you
Yeah.
had done some calculations around
Sure.
funding this project at its full amount. And I think what I heard you say is if that were the case, we would use all of the reserves,
Well,
except
so-
for perhaps $50,000.
May I clarify too
Yes,
that,
please.
so the budgetary reserve for CPC is a different kind of account. So there's the CPA fund balance.
Yep.
There's the 3 area, policy area buckets. And then there's the budgetary reserve, which is an amount set aside and allocated at town meeting every year, so that in the circumstance of a special town meeting, that's the pool we would be drawing from if a CPA application came in and there was a special. So it's not completely eliminating the CPA fund balance, it's that budgetary reserve allocation at the end of every fiscal year goes to the fund balance if a special town meeting and allocation doesn't occur.
So one of the reasons I'm asking that question, and I guess I would ask everyone to consider, as you would, the fact that there are other applications, and how does this impact that? But what I'm thinking about in particular, is the debt for the town hall.
Oh, that's always top of the list, and there always are funds reserved for that.
There will.
And that's historic, you see,
We would be able to fund that,
always. That,
always.
when Jackie and I worked this out last week or so, we made certain assumptions, such as town hall debt would be paid.
8 years or something, 'cause,
That's the one that we have to.
Yeah.
We're well aware of that on the committee.
Yeah.
And something I will say is that looking at CPA in the future, when I met with our finance director in terms of forecasting revenues, is that something that I've been looking at for the committee is, you know, that's a long-term commitment of this committee, it's a long-term commitment of the community, and do our revenues, as the state match declines, are they going to be sufficient for that longer-term commitment? So that is something I'm working the numbers up for that meeting. as Harriet asked me to kind of play with the numbers in all sorts of scenarios so that the committee that night, we're not doing back of the napkin math.
Yeah.
You know, to do our allocations, which we,
Which is why I thought.
yeah, so I've been looking at moving the money around so that I can present what the numbers are, depending on which applications the committee would like to fund, and knowing which areas the money can be pulled from, depending on what the will of the committee is for funding.
So when do you think that recommendation would become available?
The 13th.
That's when it's going to be voted. When would it become available?
The application due date is February 11th, so there could be applications that we receive between now and the 11th that we would have to take into consideration, but I would imagine I would have draft numbers probably that evening or the day before the meeting on the 13th, so the 11th or the 12th. Could get those to you.
So just one last thing, people who know me, and as a member of the selectmen, I'm no different. Process is really important to me. And also as a member of the Board of Selectmen, we're responsible to ensure that everything that any board, including our own, does not have legal ramifications or bring the community at any risk. So we've been in some conversation with our real legal counsel. Although it is not a question specifically for Mr. DeFranza, I think, and Harriet did allude to the fact that we have received a summary memo. Council was hoping to be here tonight. And Harriet may not think that it was new information, but I'm going to take a guess that some others may be interested to hear at least some part of that in context. So Peter has received that a few hours earlier than I did. Peter Lombardi is our town administrator, and if I'm going to ask him, are you still there?
Yep.
Yes. If very briefly, and we won't take much time on this, but if very briefly you will summarize for everyone, but also for your consideration as you go through this, what we're having to think about as a town and relative to legal.
Sure.
And risk.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, hopefully everybody has a copy of the memo that special counsel provided. Just a reminder, we generally, the town uses town council, KP law for town council. Because this matter has been ongoing for some time, retained special counsel that was involved in the original application of the ZBA and going through the permitting process, and so have remained with that special counsel to date. So the memo that's addressed to the CPC is from special counsel and does go through a lot of what has been discussed tonight relative to the fact that the term sheet that resulted from the mediation session a few weeks ago has been agreed to, obviously, by the private parties. We got some affirmation from Andrew that his board has approved it. There are still some questions outstanding relative to the full plaintiff's approval of it. 2 plaintiffs signed off on the term sheet, and again, we're waiting for confirmation from their legal counsel that's representative of the approval of all of the plaintiffs. Presumably it is at this point, and as they continue to work through the settlement agreement process. I know that in the application itself that's before the board, there's a copy of that term sheet, and the header on that is settlement agreement, just to avoid any confusion there. Settlement agreement is still in the process, working back and forth with legal, so just to be clear on that. And the council's memo, about halfway through the second page, does make clear that the contingencies that are included in that term sheet and will ultimately be in the settlement agreement itself don't obviously bind the committee to recommend funding for the project necessarily. You can go through your normal evaluation process with this application, same as any other, nor would the ZBA ultimately be necessarily required to permit the modifications to the comprehensive permit. as they go through their own process. Those will be independent processes, same as they would any other way, presuming it's remanded by the courts back to the ZBA, which we think will happen. It's just a matter of when, not necessarily if. Obviously, if at any point along the way, either the funding isn't secured or the ZBA wouldn't approve the permit for whatever reason, then that term sheet, that settlement agreement would fail, and we'd be back to where we were a couple weeks ago, which is that there would be a 60-unit comprehensive permit that had been issued by the ZBA that would be, still in appeal and in litigation, and that litigation would presumably move forward. And as was mentioned earlier, again, because of the various moving parts that are still outstanding, there would be some need to include very specific contingency language in the CPC's approval of funding if the committee were so inclined. So those contingencies would, at minimum, need to include the ZBA's issuance of the modification to the comprehensive permit, the passage of the appeal period, so getting through that appeal period without any appeal, and dismissal of the pending litigation. And the one other element, if it weren't complicated enough, that isn't necessarily relevant to the ongoing litigation or the settlement agreement, but is another consideration that the town will have to weigh in on at some point in the process, is its chapter land.
Yeah.
So
We're all aware of that.
Yeah, so the town ultimately will have the right of first refusal, and so whatever action the CPC takes relative to the funding will have to account for that contingency.
Exactly. That's just one more of the contingencies.
Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. That was the
Go
only
ahead.
one
Yep.
that I really noted in passing.
Yep.
I would like to point out one other thing. Harbor Light is requesting $750,000 from this committee. That is not the largest recommendation from this committee. You may remember a few years ago, we approved $800,000 for the swimming pool at Patton Park.
That was 698,000, I believe.
That wasn't 800.
One
That
thing,
was spent, 698.
And we, well,
That was
we know
2001.
that, yes. Yeah.
so it's actually not the biggest, but, good point. So relative to this agreement that I think, please, everyone should read carefully through this process, relative to the memo, the legal memo, is the fact that he says, we've been advised that the committee, of course, is allowed, but not required, to consider an act on a funding request now, even though there is litigation still pending, as we know, which would go away once the settlement, I believe, settlement agreement has actually been signed and adjudicated. Time frame, we talked about that. Some people say next week. The application, I believe says spring. Don't know. But this says a new application for funding is exactly that, a new application. Prior requests, proposals, or applications for monies to fund the project, i.e. the original version, are of no consequence. And I think that's a little strong, of no consequence. But I would point out that everything that you do see, other than the term sheet and the financial update, everything that in this application is the previous application.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not, I would encourage us, or I would ask, this is, I guess, an ask for Mr. DeFranza, that to the extent possible, this application be updated with current information. Kind of hard to do because it hasn't been agreed upon by the court yet, but to some extent, current information.
There is, on the financials are all updated.
Just the financials, yeah, just the financials, but it says things, so a person who has never seen this will see an application that says, this project has been unanimously approved by the ZBA. I use that as an example. Well, the original project was, but this is a new project and a new application. So I just want people to recognize that as they're reading it. And actually it had not occurred to me in that sense until I saw this from council. So there, I guess I'll just come right out and say it. I hope that the process that has to happen to cross a lot of Ts and dot a lot of Is that will allow this to move forward more easily and with less risk. I hope they happen quickly, because to the extent that anyone has to take any financial action with all these contingencies makes it, I think, a higher risk for the town and potentially a higher risk of approval. So that's all I have.
Mr. Fieri, would you like to ask any comments?
Well, I mean, I guess, obviously the board previously did approve a larger project. My memory is that we also asked questions then about whether the project could be smaller than it was. And there were real concerns about the economic viability of the project if it got smaller. So I guess my question kind of focuses in, my first question focuses in on that issue. What's changed and what makes it easier for you to say now that 45 is economically, it's not just feasible, but it's viable?
Yeah, I think nothing makes it easier. So I think possible, but not easier. And I think, to Mr. Burt's point, the operating model will have to change and will be good, but not as good as it would have been. And so those are the concessions that we made to make it possible, essentially, is accepting an operating model with less staffing levels than we would have liked. Still good staffing levels, but not as good. And on the capital side, you know, navigating one phase versus two phases, there's some savings there based on the staging, but it's painful. It's not pleasant, but it's viable.
The rest of your financing, in other words, the total construction cost will be, and I know you don't go dark, but I mean, approximately, the numbers have changed, obviously, because it's a smaller project, and I assume things get more expensive as far as construction in the period of time since the appeal. How do you see construction costs today?
Yeah, we construction costs for those of anybody who's not in that space is very difficult at the moment. So there's projected to be, as the economy is potentially slowing, that maybe that's going to lighten a little bit, but we're not expecting that. So the numbers in this application assume current numbers with an escalator. And so that's where we are with the numbers, but construction is very difficult at the moment, very expensive. But
and the rest of your financing, when you were before us, if you were candid that you were going to have to go through a round or two with the state before you were sure that you were going to get funds. I'm assuming that none of that happened while the matter was on appeal.
Indeed, no.
And when's the first shovel going to go in?
That's a great question, Tony. I would guess this is probably 5 years from now, at best, shovel in the ground. Now, it could be sooner than that, depending on how lucky we get. But this is one of the problems, if people may recall, is this is because it's a senior project, and the state is not generally friendly to them 100% senior deals, especially in a community like Wenham. When we originally made the application, and there was a lot of support, the idea was that we were hoping to persuade the state with a level of local support, both from funding and in the permitting process, which was going along according to plan. So we would not be doing this again. If we were starting this right now, we would not do it. But because we had started it already and made that much progress with it and got that far, but we still expect that the state is going to require multiple rounds. The good news is that as a part of this, people may recall, among the people that the suit was brought against, the state was included. That count was dismissed. So the state is very aware of the project, and we're hoping that will have a favorable impact on how it's received.
But just so everybody understands, if the state, if you're not successful,
you're done.
This project never goes forward.
That's correct.
And the only other question that I've got, and probably should go to special counsel, but maybe you know the answer. Once the ZBA approves a project, hypothetically, if it approved this project, do we have protection from 40B up through and including the period of time that the first shovel goes in the ground? My memory was, well, do you know the answer to that?
So I'm not Adam Costa, who I believe is counsel. Is that right? And he's much taller than I am. But my understanding is that when a project is permitted, as long as it's not under appeal, that you then have coverage for the permitted units. So if it takes us X years to be funded, the town will still be able to count. Will be able to count the units. When it was under appeal for more than 12 months, you no longer. So 12 months from July of 2016 until today, you didn't have protection. That's my understanding, but I'm not an attorney.
Peter?
Do you mind if I just ask one question
Sure.
related to the ZBA?
Sure.
Condition 3 of the term sheet talks about potentially reducing the height of the building from 3 to 2 stories.
Yeah.
It has that, I forget what Jen called it, some kind of special language in there.
Yes.
It gives you some wiggle room in terms of unless it's not feasible due to physical site constraints or significant additional costs.
Right.
By the time you go to the ZBA, will you know whether it's a 2 or 3 unit project?
Not 2 or 3 unit.
Story.
2 or 3 story?
Sorry.
Yes.
Unit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm
We would have to approve everything from the clapboards to the height of the.
right. My
Yeah, I mean, so recognizing that that's probably several months out, do you have a sense generally of when that will be known before that?
So we think we know that now, but I have the drawing here actually that shows the movement, but I want to make sure that we have the document from Mr. Burnett that gives us the 4/10 of an acre and that's formal and binding, and then we'll be able to show the reduced height. But so far, my conversation with Mr. Burnett is that he was willing to do that, and the architect confirmed that if he is willing to do that, that we can get it to 2 stories. So what I know today is that it appears very likely that it can go to 2 stories.
Did the purchase price of the property increase as a result of the 4/10 of an acre?
No.
That's good.
So,
I hope Bob's not watching this on TV.
So it sounds like admirably you have done some work already, and I think it would be very helpful to your cause, and to whatever these boards decide, to have some of this application updated, even if it's not, architecturally signed off, engineeringly signed off, to see the results of some of that work, so that they can envision what it looks like and what it is, and anything that you have done that would be more reflective of the current application. So if you can do that, that would be great.
Yeah.
Mr. Fieri, how long do you think it would take for the ZBA to update its ruling or make a new comprehensive permit available?
It's not a new permit, it's an amendment.
We covered everything from water mitigation to septic to a million other things.
We did.
So I would think it could be relatively quickly done. I mean, I would hope it would be 30 days.
Okay.
Less.
I would guess.
Good. That's what I was interested in, some time frame, and that would meet with your time frame too.
They would.
Get everything that he would need. As Catherine said, any of these updates that would just be helpful for everybody to see.
Right.
Yes, Peter?
Okay, just on a process clarification point, you don't intend to go back before the ZBA until at least after the town meeting vote.
That's correct.
On this final request, just so everything's clear, timing-wise.
Right.
Because once the ZBA acts on the application, makes a decision, goes through the appeal period, that project is permitted.
Right.
So you need, for your purposes, for the sake of the settlement, the terms of the settlement agreement.
Everything else has to be done first.
That funding all has to be in place before we go.
Correct.
Back to the ZBA. Okay.
I know we have other people here, and they may be here for other issues. This is not really a hearing, but is there anybody else in the audience who has any questions? Virginia, anybody has any questions for Mr. DeFranza? Please feel free.
I have one.
Well, wait a minute, let me just go through this. No? Okay. Anybody on this committee then? Yes.
Andrew, going back to the list of applying.
Yes.
Does the state have any impact on that process?
They have a lot of impact on it.
Say, and they're in the process of realigning or redeveloping how the list is going to be formed and who can make the determination. Because it's supposed to be, it used to be the unit, Hamilton Housing Authority, Wenham Housing Authority, had their list.
Right.
But the state is getting involved and saying, no, you're going to go to this source. They're going to determine the list.
For public housing.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is not public
That's what I
housing.
was wondering. So you're exempt of that. Thank you.
Right.
That's what I needed.
There is other hair on that, but hypothetically, not the same problem. Yes, sir.
Does anybody else on any of the boards or in the audience have any questions at this point?
Question on, you had said that the 750,000, there were different buckets and that sort of thing. You said, I think a lot of it was coming from something called the reserve, almost a reserve. That's something that is not allocated every year, it goes into that reserve. How many years has it taken to get to the 750, I guess? What does that represent for, I guess, an amount of time?
Go ahead.
If I may.
Mhm.
So the way that CPA works, you know, across the state is that every year, depending on what town meeting voted for a surcharge, there's local revenue from taxpayers. Then there's a state match that's determined based on the number of communities, how much they've raised. Wenham gets a relatively healthy state match in comparison due to the fact that we're a 3% surcharge rather than a 1 or 2%. So over the last, I would say, 2 to 3 fiscal years, the CPC has brought in $350,000 to $400,000 a year in CPA revenue. Every year they have to take the first 30% off the top of those revenues and put them into the policy area allocation buckets. So there's always money every year that has to go into those policy area buckets. The rest goes into that budgetary reserve so that if they had a second town meeting or a special town meeting, they had money for those projects at that special town meeting. At the end of the fiscal year, the allocations in the different policy areas carry over and stay in those line items. The budgetary reserve goes into the big CPA fund. And so the CPA fund is always growing, the policy area buckets are always growing. That budgetary reserve is a one-time, do we have the possibility of a special, do we want to be able to make funding available if someone puts in an application, but at the end of the year that goes back to the greater fund. And I can clarify that the greater fund balance, based on our initial projections for this year, is at about $389,000, whereas the budgetary reserve could be allocated to up to $271,000, and then there's the 3 policy areas. So the committee did hear a report from me on that at the meeting on the 17th, and I can speak with you after unless the committee wants more detail now.
No, I think that's sufficient.
But
right now, thank you.
On the 13th is when they make the decisions about where the revenues are going and then what expenditures will be coming from those revenues.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? If not, Catherine, you're welcome to stay, but if you wanted to.
Well, I'll be staying because that's, I like to do that, but I will take a motion to adjourn.
I won't be staying because I don't want to do that.
I'll take a motion to adjourn the selectmen's meeting.
So moved.
Second, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. We
Okay.
are adjourned.
Can I ask one more
Oh,
question?
sure.
Andrew?
Just hang on.
Andrew, who would be the deed holder
Eventually?
eventually?
Yeah, so for any of these projects similar to Turtle Creek, we hold them in a subsidiary, and so they're the subsidiary entity. In this case, Maple Woods LLC would hold the deed. Of Harbor Light. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Okay.
Nice to see everybody.
Very much, Andrew.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yep. Okay. Okay, we'll take a 2-minute recess while people pack up and leave, and then we'll move on to our next item. Settle down.
Taking Leo's seat so I don't
Yes.
have to crane my neck.
I don't blame you at all.
I know, I'm in a bad spot.
Continuing on in the agenda, the next item is a presentation from the Community House.
I was just thinking about it. If you can't, if this is not working out for you, just the little side button here. If the, 'cause I don't feel like it's. Oh, there it goes. You're ready.
Okay, let me just make sure I've got this.
Margaret know I was gonna be a planning board Thursday night.
Oh, right.
Do we want to wait for Tom to come back, or just go right in? Oh, you're
No,
here.
I'm here. I just moved, yeah.
Yes, but
That's better. I didn't want
Well, thank you
to talk
for-
to your back, so I appreciate
That's right,
that.
yeah.
We are on video. I think she went to the ladies' room.
Okay, so we're on video, so it's all right. Okay, go ahead, thank you.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Melissa Elmer. I'm the director of the Community House. Been there for 12 years. I'd like to introduce Tricia Michelson, who's our director of development, who's a co-presenter with me tonight. We're going to talk a little bit. I realize we have 10 minutes. And I know that last presentation only lasted 10 minutes, but I promise not to be over time, but it's so important. I see so many familiar faces, so I know that many of you are very familiar with the Community House. Of course, we have been working over the last 12 months on revising the strategic plan for the organization, which is 98 years old now, this year in 2019. So as we get closer to the 100th anniversary of the organization, we've been taking a close look at our mission, who we are, what is our purpose, what are our goals, where we're headed, and what we want to accomplish and achieve in the next 100 years of serving our communities. We refreshed the mission statement of the Community House, so I think it begs sharing with you that the Community House is dedicated to enriching the community through arts and programs that promote togetherness and community spirit. And that has always been at the forefront of the values of the Community House since 1921. The clicker seems to be a little delayed here.
You can always use the right-hand arrow.
Perfect. Thanks, Tricia.
That's why I'm here.
Many of you know how we deliver on the mission, but I think it's not as widely known when you drive by the Community House at 35 miles an hour exactly how many people we serve when you see folks coming in one or two at a time. But we do welcome over 1,000 visitors every week. And that's 52,000 people a year. It's a lot. It's certainly a very busy place. We host programs such as Sing and Dance with the Music Man. Wenham's very own Brian Dozier performs 3 mornings a week for up to 50 toddlers, infants and toddlers, and their caregivers on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. We have a thriving performing arts program, Stage 284, that welcomes actors of all ages, from our youngest being usually around 6 years old to in their 60s and 70s. Right now, we just finished To Kill a Mockingbird, and our lead actors are well into their 60s and 70s and having a blast with us. We entertain over 5,000 people with those shows each year. Many people know us for our traditional events: Father-Daughter Ball, Mother-Son Night Out, Breakfast with Santa, the Community Block Party. I've seen many of you with your families at those events. Many people don't know that the Sundays in Patton Park concerts are hosted and funded by the Community House. This year we had our largest attendance of all time, with an average of 200 concert goers each week in the park in our 16th year.
And just an added note, the shift this year seemed to be in families participating more than ever before. It had been primarily a senior audience, and this year we started to really see a change in that demographic, more families from all of the surrounding communities coming together. So
True.
Kind of a revitalized approach.
I think with the playground and the pool and making those investments into our parks, we're attracting more families to gather and come together in our community, which is fabulous, and a reflection of the investment that this committee has made.
People come for after-school workshops for performing arts. We have monthly social events for kids in grades 4 through 8, whether it's teen dances or a kids' night out. Parents can drop their kids off at the community house and know that their children are safe and that they're supervised and they're participating with their peers in organized activities while with us. Special Friends is a program that was started by our beloved friend Joanne Patton nearly 30 years ago that hosts monthly socials for adults with disabilities. We are the largest teen employer in town. We currently have 12 students from the regional on our staff who support the many events that we do because, of course, we can't do it all by ourselves. As well as offering complimentary meeting space for civic groups such as the Walking Clubs and the League of Women Voters. You are amongst the privileged few to hear tonight about a new program that we're excited to talk about and we'll be launching a public campaign around next week. In the fall, the Community House is opening a new program called the Kids Community at 284, which is the street address for the Community House that we use oftentimes in our branding. This program will offer before and after school care for children in grades K through 5 with a curriculum focused on STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. By 2022, it is our board of directors' plan to complete building renovations and expansion that will allow us to extend this program, the Kids Community, to offer childcare offerings, as well as enrichment programs for younger children and families, including infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and summer programs as well. You all know and appreciate this historical significance of the Community House, 98 years old, built in 1921, has always been a community center for the two towns of Hamilton and Wenham. It is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and like I said, we'll be celebrating its 100th anniversary in 2021. Past presidents include names you'll recognize: Elbridge Anderson, Marjorie Davis, Randy Smolik, and Blair Villa. Current board members from Wenham include Jay Mark, Jan Sulman, Brian Minnick, and Randy Smolik. Randy Smolik is amongst our longest serving board members of the Community House. This March, he'll celebrate 28 years on our board of directors. He was so disappointed. He's always attended CPA presentations with me in the past, and he was unable to come tonight. He dropped off a letter this morning that he wanted to share with you because he couldn't come and speak. We won't read that out loud, but I implore you to kind of read it. But the Community House is obviously something that's near and dear to his heart, as he is to us, and he very much wanted his voice heard tonight. So what we've asked you to do through our proposal is to participate in the 100th anniversary campaign for the Community House that is in the preliminary planning stages, right? I spoke with Ms. Davis on the phone to indicate that we're working on this plan for a $2 to $3 million capital campaign that will help us renovate and expand the Community House to outfit it for modern use. It was designed with the needs of our community 100 years ago in mind, and that doesn't always suit us very well today. Given the amount of people that we're serving and the multiple uses that it does get. Our boiler is starting to fail, and so we need to start to be proactive about taking steps and measures to take care of that before it is absolutely failed. And so we are here about a year earlier than I had originally anticipated, but all of this is well underway. I think it's always important to remind us all, and I remind myself this all the time, that the Community House was a gift to us. It's my honor and pleasure to be the director, to work there every day, and make it sort of my personal, career commitment to ensure that it's taken care of, so that George and Emily Mandel's wishes are carried out today, and that we can continue to serve generations of our community members, our families and kids for the next 100 years. So I feel it's like my duty, it's our community's duty and responsibility to preserve its mission and purpose for everyone down the road. We can go to the next slide. So through this campaign, we have we have a goal to preserve, to renovate, and expand the community house. And when we break it down into 3 buckets, we are proposing that we have preservation and renovation efforts as part of our grander plan that are eligible for CPA support. We know that there's work that we want to do to the building that is not CPA eligible. We haven't asked you for funding on that. And we know that we want to expand the facility to some degree to support current programming, our future growth, which is also not CPA eligible. So when we look at all the things we want to do, we've had to narrow it down so it looks like a mishmash of a lot of different things. But what we've done is we've drilled down to the things that are eligible, and that's what we're asking you to support. We know that we need to raise $2 to $3 million to do all the things that we need to do to support the organization, to upgrade the facility, to meet the demands, the current demands, and the future demands. And so this portion of what we like to do is what we feel is, again, eligible for CPA funding. I won't go through that long list. You've had a chance to sit with it, and I'm happy to answer some questions for you in a bit. Many people wonder, how is the community house funded? We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We always have. There is not a line item in the town's operating budget that is supporting what we do. It's 100% homegrown. We, of course, charge admission or registration fees for the programs and events that we serve or offer. Some are free, but many you do have to pay to participate in. We do have some tenants within our building who rent from us. Some people have weddings and special events that they pay a rental fee to use the facility for. That accounts for about 25%. Tricia really works hard on a daily basis to make sure that we're doing our part to raise funds necessary to do what we do, to represent another 22%, as well as writing grants to represent 17%. 8% would be potentially sponsorships, ad sales, and other revenue streams from reimbursements for things that we do through the building. So we, of course, at the Community House are always grateful for your past support, for all the support that we always get from our communities on a day-to-day basis to do what we're able to do to serve. And just want to thank you for your consideration, for hearing us tonight and giving some consideration to supporting it.
Thank you very much.
You are welcome.
Let's start on this side of the room. Barbara, do you have any questions?
No, we take advantage of the community house. I just have to throw this out there, though. WVIS, which I am on the board, I used to be the president, Harriet is the president, employs a ton of kids every summer. I know it's not year-round, but we hired too many kids, if anything. But it is a great organization. The Special Friends program is near and dear to my heart with a disabled adult daughter. I can't say anything bad about you guys. You're doing a great job, and since you've taken over, you've really spruced things up and gotten programming going in the right direction. So
thank you so much. We'll have to share lists of employees. Maybe we can bring some of yours on.
Some of them work for us too. Some of the employees. So, and it's only a summer job, but.
Wonderful. Well, it's a great program that you offer as well, and we have great respect for WVIS. You always support our summer concert series in the park, and it's so important for us to collaborate and work together. That's really what community is all about, and I think that that's what makes the community house special, is that it tends to be something that we can really kind of rally around to support something that really benefits and affects us all in one way or the other, depending on where we are in the spectrum of life, whether we're raising our young kids or, now our kids have grown up, or maybe we don't have kids, but we really enjoy an evening of music in the park on a Sunday night in the summer. So it's great. Thank you.
Arthur, do you have any questions?
Yeah, well, I just have fond memories going by there, and the father-daughter dances and festivities with wonderful Eagle Scout presentations that went on there are excellent. The only thing I look at is the projected budget. Some of these things would come under maintenance, and we have had an issue with our, over the years, using CPC funding for maintenance projects because it cannot be allocated for that. So we'd really have to discuss some of this if some CPC money is going for some of these items.
I think it's important to, you know, take a close and critical eye at that. I've talked to Jackie about it, and I know the folks in Hamilton have reached out to Stuart, thank you, at the coalition, to run these items by, and it's my understanding that he had said that he felt that they were eligible, and so we continued forward with asking for your support on that. But certainly if that's the case, we should have a conversation about that, because we wouldn't want to ask for support where it wasn't eligible.
I want you to get in trouble because we needed a generator down at the Housing Authority to support the electrical system. That is not allowed in older projects. In newer projects, it is. So some of these things, that you're close.
It's subject to interpretation, and I think that the gentleman at the state is, you know, very knowledgeable and has been very helpful in helping sort out some of that.
Yes, because he's the one I tried to get that system at our Housing Authority, and he said, no, it cannot happen. So it's similar here. So we'll have to talk.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah, picking up on that, because you and I have had some conversations, but what I saw from the coalition stated that some of these items would be allowable provided that the overall building was very secure. And you've indicated that the overall building is not necessarily secure, and that you do need to have a lot of work done on it. So I think that we really have to think clearly about this, and I just wonder whether this is putting the cart before the horse. Should you start your campaign, get some funding in, and then come back for this kind of funding? I think it's something we will have to look into.
What do you mean by secure?
Well, you've indicated to me maybe the roof needs to be redone. Are we going to replace the heating system and some of these things if, in fact, the overall building is in dire straits?
I would say that the building is not in dire straits. I'm actually proud that it's not. That we want to be proactive about preserving it. Things are going to fall into disrepair, and they're going to need to be preserved or replaced. Right. And so, in fact, the heating system is starting to fail. It hasn't failed. It could last 30 days. It could last till tomorrow. It could last 3 years. We're being proactive because we're now seeing signs of it failing, and we don't want to wait until it has failed. And I do feel that if we wait 2 or 3 years to do that, we are going to, it's going to be much more costly, much more difficult of a project than, okay, we see the signs now, let's do something about it before.
No, I hear you, but that's just my comment, is that I think we have to look very carefully at the eligibility of enormous number of the items,
of course,
on the list.
And I should say that the roof is also a slate roof. It's original to the building, also in good shape. We hope that we could. It would be horrible. It would be horrific to see it replaced with modern shingles and asphalt, right? And so preserving the slate roof is a process, you know. And the gutters are really what take the beating the most, because the slate is steep, it's slippery, and when the ice falls, it comes fast and hard, and the pressure and the force rip the gutters off, which are copper, and they're beautiful and they're historic and designed with the beauty of the building and its integrity, all of those things in mind, but expensive. And as a nonprofit, I feel we do pretty well at the maintenance side of taking care of the property, but it is these larger projects that are taxing on our operational budget that we have a harder time weathering.
Okay.
Yep, so I'm a big fan of the community house. It was one of the first, community spaces that I went to, meeting Brian Dozer and then many other things over the years. And your programming has kept up, and I think it's it's a real asset to the community. But I was concerned also about some of these items. I don't have a determination, but I think that's something we do have to look into, like what is actually covered. And just in terms of, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but it might be useful to us to know what the capital campaign would entail. I mean, you know, what other things does the building need that would come after this? It might put it in perspective for us.
That's a great question. So Tricia and I were actually talking about that tonight, that, you know, we feel with confidence that we're going to have to raise $2 to $3 million for what our board has written into our strategic plan to look at. And that is going to involve expansion, because our space, as we felt last night when we had a board meeting and rehearsals and multiple things going on, that, you know, we were tight for space. And as we continue to meet the needs of our community and expand our programming to meet the needs for infants, toddlers, preschool, and summer programming, we're going to need more space to do that. We're going to need to renovate existing spaces to meet those needs, and that's going to involve an expansion. So because you're so familiar with the community house, the portion where the offices are, the bathrooms, the lower level program room, that was an addition that was put onto the building in 1990. And the original plans for that addition called for it to be a 2-story addition. But at the time, due to whomever that was involved at the time, you know, it was really purely a financial decision at the time to scale it back. And we use all of that space a lot daily. And as we expand with kids programming, we know that we have a high water table in the area that we are in Hamilton, and all of our kids right now are in the basement for programming. And those spaces have a tendency to flood at times when there's high rainfall, or even when there's not, because of the water table. And so we would like to expand the facility up as originally intended in 1990 to accommodate the kids programs, get them up out of the basement area, and repurpose the basement space for other uses. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I just think the expansion calls for really focusing on young families and kids and child care programming in particular. And to do that in a great space that's compliant with ADA regulations and all of the rest of it, you know, there will be some need for some new construction as well. And then to renovate some of the existing space will be a piece of that. So to restore and retain the historic building.
Don?
Thanks.
Well, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking the same thing. I can pick a couple of things out of here. I say, well, you could say you're preserving something historic, but an awful lot of this to me looks like maintenance.
Right. That's what we'll have to discuss in more detail. Dennis?
How are we doing tonight, Melissa?
Hi, Dennis.
As the Joint Rec Committee member, you're doing a tremendous job. I've been with the Rec Committee 15 years, and our relationship with the community house has grown tremendously since you've taken over. We're not duplicating any programs. We're not competing for the same people. We're all just going, and you guys just do a tremendous job. The facility, it may not be historical, but it is certainly historical value. You know, obviously we have to wade through the weeds to see what's really going to be available, but I will support you as much as I possibly can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just add that you did mention the former directors. One of them was my mother, Marjorie Davis, and I used to go to the community house when I was 10 years old for Friday night movies. As you say, it was very safe. We could be dropped off and come back in a couple of hours.
Still the
it
case.
really has been a long time, wonderful service.
There's some things that have not changed. That would be one of them, fortunately.
Patrick?
My son is participating in Stage 284 and has loved it, and we love going there. You know, not to beat the dead horse, there are items to look at. With the expansion, I'm assuming you would not change the facade of the building.
Correct. You know, and I can't say that, you know, I'm only one voice, but the design of the building, you know, was designed by Guy Lowell, you know, and that is really the signature of everything we, who we are, our 100-year existence. So, we've talked to architects about different ways that we can create more space without altering that. There's so much to be said about the architecture and that facade. So I hear what you're saying, and I agree.
And what do you think the time frame would be for all these items?
Well, we're sensitive to the fact that, the funding is available in July, right? Must be spent by June. And so we feel as though that it's conceivable that most of this work can be done in that time frame.
Natalie?
Thank you for everything that you've done.
Thank you so much.
I mean, you can't argue with a mission like that, right? It's great. I'm new here to the community. We moved here in the middle of 2017. I have 2 7-year-olds. I think, it sounds to me like you've listened to the community and have responded with a new program for childcare, which helps the families. I just have a couple, because I think this application, was it more than just the one page, or did you have more to the actual
That is
application?
what you have is the entire application at this time.
So for me, I didn't grow up, so I'm here to have context of it, but things that I'm curious about are things like, what is your operational budget? What's the total value of the property? In order to hear the community's needs, have you done a recent survey or some sort of big strategy review for the community? Have you actively engaged the entire community to say, here's what they need, here's how we're addressing it? So the bigger picture for me was lost in the application. I mean, if you guys are all caught up and you feel like this is an offline thing, I'd love to meet with you, or if you think it's, we have time now to do it, I don't want to take up too unnecessary time, but
They're great questions. Number one, the welcome mat is always open, whether you come as a group or as an individual. We welcome you at any time to come, take a look at any of these items in person, and talk with us. That opportunity never expires. The operational budget this year, in 2018, was just over $600,000. And there was one other question you had, Natalie, about the survey.
Yep.
That is something that we routinely do every 2 to 3 years. We're due to do that relatively soon, but we feel relatively confident that we have a pulse on the needs of the community all the time. And generally when we do these surveys, the same things surface. And that is a need for childcare, more programming for the kids, more opportunities to bring the community together, and more opportunities for the arts. There is very much an appetite within these 2 towns for more enrichment and more engagement that isn't necessarily sports related. We leave that stuff to the rec department. They're pros at that, and I'm certainly not going to pretend to be one. But that, it's the arts, it's the enrichment, it's the learning, it's the workshops, primarily by investing through our kids and as they age through the schooling. And then again, for the, on the other side of the spectrum too, for older adults. Those are the primary sentiments that generally come out of the surveys.
You're a wonderful advocate for the community house. I want to thank you for coming in this evening. And is there any other final question, Arthur?
Yeah, it's Melissa, correct, Melissa? I see 17% of your money is grant writing, and I'm just going back to my experience in the Wenham Housing Authority. Our executive director is Paula Mountain, and we needed a new generator to provide the electricity. No. Well, there are people that help grant writers that are provided by the state. You're probably well aware of this. And Paula was very persistent, and she rewrote it using various trigger words, and we just received $75,000 for a generator.
That's fabulous.
So what I'm just saying is, I see we have 17% here. Utilize those people. The state used to provide those grant writers for free, and
for state services or for nonprofits as well.
For the school system, okay, community service. Okay, so I'm not certain how you fit into that, but just think about it. Because you could get that number 17% up higher with grants, too. Just food for thought.
We need to talk to Paula.
All amounts, she's a sweetie.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. If no one else has any questions?
Would it be helpful to the committee to hear about Hamilton's timeline as I believe the community house has an application before the Hamilton CPC as well. Would you just like to
No, I
know
don't
the
think
date
so.
of their vote?
No,
Okay.
no, we will make our own decisions. I think that's what we've typically done, and granted that we pay 1/3 and they would pay 2/3, but no, let's leave it at that.
Thank you so much for your
Okay,
time and
thank you.
attention. Have a good night.
Now, looking at the agenda and looking at the time, the last two items under applications have not presented applications to us, and the representatives are not.
The
No, we have one.
representative
We have one
from
representative.
item D is here. If the committee had questions about the application, though it has not been submitted yet. So we had two applicants who had mentioned an interest in applying.
Right.
Due to a public posting,
Right.
open meeting law, we included them on the agenda for presentations.
Right, but we don't have applications yet. So let's put those off, okay? At this point. I think we've had an awful lot,
Right, but how will that work, though, with
well,
our meeting schedule and when we're going to be deciding? I think that was the issue.
I think that's the timing of it, is if this committee wants to hear presentations from
we
any
might have to
applicants
have another meeting.
Well,
between the application closing date on the 11th and the
Then-
meeting to vote on the 13th,
The-
instead of hearing presentations at the beginning of that meeting.
How long who is here who would like to speak? Missy? All right. Do you want to speak briefly and ask your questions?
I can speak briefly, yeah.
Good, thank you.
Briefly being the key word.
Right.
I'll be very brief.
Just brief as it gets later.
So nice to see you all again. Again, my name is Missy Berry. I'm the Conservation and Open Space Coordinator for the town. I'm here on behalf of the Open Space Committee. We've not submitted our application yet, as you stated. We're hoping to submit by the end of this week or the beginning of next week. Our project will be for doing a townwide trail mapping. The need to disseminate information on the current trails in town, as well as improving the connectivity and maintenance of the trails, was identified as a need during the public input phase of the Open Space and Recreation Plan. Many of the action items from that plan relate to the trails in town. We're proposing a trail mapping project that would address those trail action items through the generation of GIS shapefiles in a map book. These updated maps would serve multiple purposes, the first being to the benefit of the public by informing them of not just where the trails are in town, but how long they are, whether or not there is parking, how many spaces, the location of trailheads, surface conditions on the trails, which would then help people identify which trails are appropriate for senior citizens and children and what activities are acceptable on each trail. And then the second purpose would be for more long-term planning for the town. And this project would include the generation of a map showing all trails with their current maintenance needs, whether that be flooded trails, overgrown trails, down trees, and they would then rank those maintenance issues for the town so that when funding, for example, the state Mass Trails grant comes along, the town would be poised to act. And these maps will also help the town better identify good areas for new trails and areas that would improve trail connectivity, which is again outlined in the open space plan. We're planning to work with the Center for Community GIS, and we're waiting on a written cost estimate from them, but based on our conversations, we're expecting about $5,000 for the cost of all of the data mapping and the trail book.
Okay. Thank you, and you will be submitting an application soon?
Yes, before the deadline, for sure.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, fine, thank you. The other application for the town clerk dehumidifier, we've not received that yet. Okay, now, one other thing that I wanted to clear up is on a previous meeting, we actually made a motion to accept the applications from the town hall for the annual debt and from Maple Woods. It turns out we really didn't need to make those motions, but since we did, it seems to me it would be appropriate to continue in that vein for the time being and to vote to accept the application from the community house, which was
And the Cedar Street, Wenham Lake bench.
The bench,
also
yeah.
needs
and
to be
this
accepted.
yes, as the Cedar Street
Wenham Lake.
Lake bench that we've discussed.
It's not a good acronym.
No, it isn't. Can I have such a motion? to accept these applications that were,
So moved.
and a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Okay, so that is that. Now, in terms of going forward, we're going to skip over item 4, which is the current fund balance report, because that's still a work in progress, along with the spreadsheet that will show all of our prior recommendations and grants over time. Is there any new business anybody wants to bring up at this point?
Do we want to address item 5 or hold it to before you?
Yeah, I want to hold that too. And I just want to remind everyone of our application deadline on February the 11th. And I think we'll put off, I don't see down here approval of minutes.
We actually skipped over it at the beginning to get into the.
Oh, my goodness sakes, we did. Oh, good, wonderful.
You do have them if you would like.
Yes, we do have them. I didn't see it on the agenda because we went right into the presentation.
We were excited.
Yeah, it was. With so many people, we haven't had such an audience ever. So, can I have a motion to approve the minutes of January 24?
Can I just, one thing that's missing is Catherine Harrison was also present at that meeting.
Oh, well, wait a minute, let's just put this on the table, then we can, so could I have a motion to accept them, these minutes?
I'd like to make a motion. So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
And any changes or corrections?
Could we amend to add Catherine Harrison as a present town official?
She didn't announce herself as that.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
I was not here representing the Board of
Yeah,
Selectmen that
she
night.
stated that
Okay.
specifically, so
Yeah.
she's in here
Mhm.
because she made
But I was
comments,
here.
correct?
As a resident.
Yes.
Oh, okay, fine.
If that's okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Good.
Okay, is there any other additions or corrections to these minutes anybody would care to make? If not, all those in favor of accepting these with that one correction
What one?
or addition?
No correction.
No, exactly, so it's,
To accept it.
fine,
To accept it, yes.
yep,
All in favor?
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Okay.
Good.
I think we've had enough for one meeting, unless anybody objects. I think we've had a lot to address. Just remind you all that our next meeting is February 13, and we also have a meeting on the 19th. The idea is that we will vote our allocations, we'll vote our motions, but then we'll come back on the 19th, presumably with motions from town council in front of us. So we will approve them and make certain that everything is just the way we want it.
And I will draft motions for the 13th as well to get us
Good,
started.
so we'll get them started. Thank you. You've been great help. Thank you very much, Jackie.
Leo Stead, I would move to adjourn.
Yes, indeed. Is there a second?
Second. I should have, right. Beat me to it.
Oh, you take the seat, you gotta take the position, you know?
It's not the.
That's right.
I'm always happy to adjourn.
Aye. All right, good.